Welcome to the 2022 18W All-Time Wrestling All or Nothing Smackdown Special. Looks like it's gonna hurt. It's not all you got! I am glad you asked. No!
No way! Watch out! He's coming in!
The cat killer prevails again!
He's gonna feel that for weeks.
All-time wrestling! Yeah, this is exactly what it sounds like. You play as these big, hulking wrestlers trying to come out on top in a 1v1 duel. Like, literally on top, like that. If you get pinned and you can't escape, you lose the game. You could play as Andre the Giant, finishing off your enemies with a splash attack. Or Macho Man Randy Savage with his diving elbow drop as his finisher. There's also a 2v2 mode and a solo mode, which we're covering if you want to skip ahead down below to the timestamps. But now let's get into the core of the game, the 1v1. Let's go. Here's a quick how to play. The goal of all-time wrestling is to pin your opponent down and then make sure they don't come up from that pin once they're pinned down. To do that, players will be wrestling each other by playing these cards from their hands that are attacks. Eventually, they'll get their opponent's health low enough that a successful pin move like that card there has a higher chance of keeping them pinned to the ground. And then you win the game. The game is played through not rounds, but rather something called the initiative. If you have the initiative, it's basically your time to attack, and then you just play cards from your hand one at a time. The other player is called the defender. So when you're the attacker playing cards, you play one card and then pay the stamina cost here. Now for any attack to succeed, you must first roll a die and then hope to match the threshold. So here, it's a 2 or higher. If you get that, the attack goes through. It does this much damage and the attack is now discarded. This attacker still has initiative, and so can play another attack now. But if the die roll doesn't hit the threshold, the attack fails, does nothing, and gets shuffled into the deck. And that attacker draws a card to replace it. With this failed attack, the initiative goes to the defender, meaning now that the defender is the attacker. A guaranteed way to make attacks fail is through the defender blocking the attack. They can discard 2 cards from their hand, and just like that, the attack is unsuccessful. Let's go back to the attack hitting though. If it actually hits, the attacker gets to choose something. Like here, they can taunt to draw more cards, or they can unleash a combo by having the next attack they play match these symbols together, and now it's an added damage. The thing to really look out for is this symbol, the pinned one. If this attack goes through, the defender is pinned down. When someone is pinned down, they have 3 tries to escape and rolling at or lower than their current health. Yes, that's the health after getting brutally slammed to the ground. If they escape successfully, the game keeps going. If they don't, well, the person who is on top doing the pinning wins the game. Players keep doing this initiative dynamic of playing cards one at a time, and then spending the stamina from it, and then eventually one player will not be able to come up from a successful pin attack, and then the game ends. That's all you need to know for now. Bros time of all-time wrestling, or ATW for short. Now, this game just immediately puts you in the action with the super vivid depictions of fighting on all the cards. Like seriously, there's punches, double leg takedowns, German suplexes, and a nice ankle lock finisher. These are all depicted on each attack right when you play them. Super satisfying. Then we gotta go to the player boards, which are really thick and chunky, having these slots to put in these nice wooden cubes. More slots come in with this great insert for all the cards. Also, it comes with a bunch of plastic bags if you need them. To wrap up the component pros, there's a really dandy player aid that you can flip around to reference whether you're attacking or defending. Let's just talk about the wrestling now though. So all-time wrestling has a very unique fighting system that we have to really praise. As a huge, jacked fighter, you still have to cleverly manage resources in tracks in a duel that consistently feels crunchy and still clean to manage. At its core, the gameplay is just the attacker plays one card. Then the defender chooses to block or not. That's it. But what to attack with is tricky from your hand, because each attack costs stamina, has a certain dice threshold, then could start opening you up for later combos if you connect these bottom symbols that give subsequent attacks more damage, or an easier die roll. As this attacker, you have to factor in that doing damage at any time lets your opponent actually get something. That is, they can draw a card or regain stamina when hit. Then by playing your card to attack, you lost stamina and a card from your hand. Remember, cards can be used to block opponents' attacks. When you go in for an attack, you also have to factor in the aftermath of it. We already talked about combos, so there's the other triggers, like re-energizing yourself to get some energy back and drawing a card, or taunting your opponent after launching attacks. That lets you draw 2 cards and regain energy. Each of these also allow your opponent to get a benefit too though, so you don't necessarily want to be taunting and re-energizing all the time. Now that we're on the topic of taunting your opponent, well, I'm sure you might have seen these little fire symbols everywhere. This gets us into this track called the momentum track. Not only does this go up from taunting, but it also goes up in your favor as you land attacks successfully. We like to think it as your attacker getting hyped, and this is hype because when it reaches the end of one of these tracks, then that fighter gets a bonus to rolling dice. When this reaches the yellow or red of one side, that player gets a bonus benefit to rolling dice on special attacks and finishers. Yeah, you know the ones that have pins on them to win the game? Okay, so not only are you managing cards in your hand, and then stamina, then health, but you're also playing to this hype and trying to swing that in your favor. So now you really have to reevaluate even getting hit by weaker attacks, because while you might be drawing a card from it, the crowd is slowly getting swung in your opponent's favor. And you don't want them to be near the red zone, because that means a pin is going to be easy for your hyped opponent to possibly lose you the game. What we're left with is a system where every attack is scrutinized by both the attacker and defender heavily. Defenders sometimes want to block to avoid damage and stop momentum from favoring their opponent, but then will lose cards from their hand. Attackers after attacking might consider taunting to hype up the crowd and draw cards, while also giving their opponent some stuff. When attacking in general, it's always the question of, is spending cards now worth it? As doing any attack loses and gains each player's stuff, that really matters. Am I gonna hype up the crowd now? Maybe I'll play some weaker punches to see how my opponent reacts? Or just play less attacks to maintain hand advantage, because you can always voluntarily pass the initiative to become the defender. Or maybe it's time to go in for the kill with the finisher. After all, players can't block finishers, so card advantage only gets you so far in this game. Like, sure, ideally when your opponent hits 6 health, you want to go for the Mega Smash Elbow Bam! There's no chance they're gonna get out of that pin, but that only hits on a 6, so maybe you want to combo up to it first, then hype up the crowd to -2 the die roll, so you're gonna have to lay the foundation. Otherwise, you may be trying to look super cool, then fall flat on your face after spending so much energy, and now your opponent has the initiative to attack you. Often players want to do the thing of not attacking and just pass the initiative to draw a card, or pass the initiative to get 3 stamina, because constantly attacking without a plan is a way to exhaust your fighter and let your opponent set themselves up to smash you. Let's talk about the pinning that goes on in this game. It is a very cool victory condition. It really makes you approach combat differently, where the goal isn't to necessarily out-attrition your opponent or reduce their health to 0. No. Health is only a means to help you escape being pinned, but you still gotta pin someone down. That's the goal. This is a fantastic way of adding thematic wrestling uncertainty to every match, since the act of pinning someone down and escaping that pin is reliant on tense dice rolls. Even if you're super ahead on health and your opponent is really low, there's no guarantees that you can win the game now, as pinned opponents still have a chance to escape. Or the reverse, a wrestler could be at reasonably high health, then Andre the Giant just launches a super strong pin down that does 6 damage. And now the man who thought he was winning can't escape this pin and loses the game. So you gotta plan a way to pin, and there's plenty of ways to start setting up pin downs where your opponent gets down and stays down. Obviously, you want to reduce your opponent's health somewhat to make the check harder, and note the health critical zone that reduces their escape attempts by 1. Then, there's even attacks that will reduce this attempt by 1, so it's not uncommon for someone to just have 1 chance to escape, making attacks like these very satisfying to trigger and so tense to escape. All-Time Wrestling also has fantastic ways to play around luck. Even though the game has plenty of dice rolling for attacks and top decking new attack cards into your hand, there's a lot of little considerations here. First of all, you will choose your starting hand of 5 cards. That's really cool. Then the game is filled with dice tweaks for you to choose when to trigger them. Like when you miss a roll on an attack, you can discard a card from your hand permanently to re-roll that attack. You gotta make sure you really want that attack though. Or if you pace yourself accordingly, you can stay in the low energy area of your stamina. That makes all your dice rolling a little bit easier. Then, as aforementioned, you want to set up the crowd to your side to land specials and finishers more consistently. But if you're really down on your luck, each player also has a reversal they can trigger once per game when it's not their turn. This decision to just do a little bit of damage, then be the one to get initiative to attack your opponent is quite tricky. Oh, wait, this is listed next to all these other abilities unique to your wrestler? Sounds like we gotta talk about all these big boys. There are 4 fighters in the base game, and then we have 4 more here to bring our grand total to 8. Now, we are mad excited about the diversity and the asymmetry of each of these fighters. Each of them just feels real and unique, and there's even a cool backstory on the back of each of their player boards here. Like, they all have different health and stamina, different decks with their own ways to attack, and probably the most importantly, there are 3 unique abilities. You got 1 passive that is always active, then 2 once per games. So you can play as Macho Man Randy Savage, and he is a little more well-rounded, with a forgiving additional opportunity to escape pin downs. Then, when it's time to strike, he can easily get the crowd on his side with Macho Madness, or stealing the initiative through Brass Knuckles to do 3 damage, hype the crowd, and then have the chance to play an attack. A more tanky fighter is Mokumbi Shumbai, who takes less damage from his opponent's specials and finishers. And he has an unbreakable will to get out of any pin down. Oh, this guy also has an altered recovery ability. That is so cool. We can really go in depth with my personal favorite, that is the British Bulldog, who plays kinda like how he sounds and look. Super aggressive. He can do so much damage as his passive, Pure Power, lets him spend a little energy to do 1 more damage with each attack. He also has this crazy ability, the Shades of Wembley, to pin an opponent down for free before their attack. So then you can voluntarily pass your action, then when your opponent attacks you, you trigger a nasty pin down to try to end the game. Playing the British Bulldog lets you play hard and fast, where you can pummel your enemy with fairly easy to land attacks that are all boosted in damage. This combination of a body slam into a flying cross body does 7 damage. Then you can taunt to hype the crowd and use that energy to land a running clothesline for 4 more damage. Also, this Bulldog's last ability is that he is gonna pin you down, whether you want to or not, letting you at any time make 1 special or finish your attack easier. That is a tricky trigger to pull that you might want to save for when the crowd isn't on your side. Okay, a weird one that really caught our eye was this one, Ray Jaguar, that is a definition of a glass cannon who can do a lot of damage but isn't physically that sturdy. This guy is all about aerial attacks, where he can take some damage on his own to boost any aerial attack. Bam, 630 splash on them. You really have to reevaluate how you approach this game when playing this guy. He has so much stamina, not that much maximum health, but has ways to easily convert stamina into health. These 8 fighters just get into how this game just has fantastic replayability. It is really the case that all-time wrestling just gets better as you play more and more, as you get to know your deck, to craft better starting hands, or to account for top decks better. And then you're questioning when's the best time to do your wrestler's unique finisher, and then when to trigger your once per game abilities. Whew, yeah, and then you're also playing against another unique fighter that has all those things of his own that you have to account for. Throughout this wrestling journey, you'll see games with early pin downs, games with plenty of back and forth, or games where both players are just, they're just too exhausted late game for a while and have to pass multiple turns to get that last crucial stamina for a pin down. With all these twists and turns of what can happen in a match, the game does run fairly true to time at about 20 to 30 minutes. Yet this could run a little faster if someone happens to nail a super high risk, high reward combo and ends the game early. Remember, anytime either of the players are pinned down, the game could just end. The final pro to wrap this all up is how the gameplay meets the theme exceptionally. There's all this crunch of all these mechanics, but it still feels like you're in a ring, fighting against someone. The round structure of initiative makes complete sense, because one guy is going to be pressing the attack until the other guy decides to retaliate, or an attack misses. Wrestlers get tired after attacking too much, maybe pull a desperation move to end the match before they run out of stamina, they fumbled, and now they are the one getting attacked. Different categories of attacks matter too with regards to fighters. Like Andre the Giant is over 400 pounds, so he's so heavy that it's harder to throw him. But when you do actually throw him, he takes more damage. Man, is this guy beefy at 20 health. All-time wrestling really is this good trade-off of doing damage by spending stamina, just like real fighters. You feel like you're pinned to the ground and the weight of the match is against you when someone does something like that on you, and then you're desperately trying to escape the clutches of him. Maybe you'll escape and keep fighting, maybe you won't. Cons time of all-time wrestling. Now, there's not that much here, but let's just go into the first one, the rules, a little bit of rules confusion. Rules confusion came in with your hand limit when you can't have more than 5 cards, but is there a way to ever draw past that? Can you draw, then discard a card? Probably not, but we would want that to be clarified. Or how about spending health to do something, like Rage Akura's ability to spend health to boost an attack? We are assuming that you cannot do this if you do not have health to spend. The next and last con has to do with some cards having the same exact art on them, like that, while having different names and abilities. That's confusing. Now, it is still impressive that there's only some pairs of cards in each deck with the same art. The vast majority of the art is different, but we would have liked at least the color of the attacker's fists to be changed. It can get confusing when cards are labeled as exactly the same name too, but then have different outcomes. Just a slight tweak in name, like even calling it Arm Drag 2.0 would work. Then maybe outline the specials and finisher cards while you're at it to make them stand out in the hand, instead of just having this tiny S or F symbol for something that is an epic move. Embrace that epicness, man. Nitpick time. So there's a gameplay mechanic that we haven't brought up yet called rampaging attacks. This is when you can play a bunch of cards from your hand at the same time as one attack, as long as they have that symbol on them. In doing so, you're spending slightly less stamina in total, and then you roll a die for each one of these. Then you can assign the die however you wish. We found this in practice to be kind of weird because your opponent can just discard 2 cards to block this because it's treated as one attack, meaning that 2 cards are being spent to block 3 cards. Also, all of these attacks get discarded regardless of how many were successfully rolled, which feels weak in a game where historically, if you were to fail a normal attack, then you put it back in your deck and then draw a replacement for it. As a rules question, when this attack does get blocked, does that mean that all of the 3 cards go back into the deck? Like how 1 card for a normal attack goes back in the deck, and then does the attacker draw 3 cards to replace his 3, or just draw 1 because it's treated as one attack? We never saw a scenario where we would want to actually do a rampaging attack in-game with its committal of 3 cards all at once. But hey, perhaps there's a certain fighter we haven't played that utilizes this very well, or maybe a fighter coming up in the future. As it is right now, this rampaging mechanic is just kind of here. It's just here. And there's only 3 cards in each deck that actually do utilize it anyways. Now for some component nitpicks. For the quality of the wood and health and stamina cubes, the rest of the tokens didn't feel great to use. Every single other piece is absolutely tiny, and for the case of the fire, it covers up the momentum you're on. So then you want to move it slightly to the side to see the bottom, but in doing so, you could accidentally mess up ordering later on because the slots are so close to each other. The best case scenario is to have this important momentum have this inlaid cube system. Then, the rulebook has a lot of typos. Granted, it generally flows fine and explains itself okay, but there's misspelled words everywhere. Like, what the heck, this recovery explanation is not correct here. Last nitpick, we would have wanted some more clear explanation on reversals. See, when you're first starting out, it might be confusing whether a reversal does damage to you or to your opponent because everything else on it affects you, like losing 2 energy, getting some more momentum. So then it makes sense, well, I guess for such a strong ability that you would suffer damage too. The explanation of doing damage to your opponent is only explained in the example for reversal. So this explanation needs to be at least under the tagline for reversal. Okay, so now we're gonna analyze the solo mode and the 2v2. Scoring is up ahead if you wanna just jump to that down below. Now this campaign, All or Nothing, has you fighting against a bunch of other Atama-controlled fighters in a wrestling tournament. Your character can lean into being good or bad, gaining them certain abilities for doing so, and training between matches to upgrade moves. In this journey to be the best, your wrestler will play over 3 chapters of making rivals or suffer debilitating injuries like for your back. My back! First, you will cement your character's identity in chapter 1, then play out a wrestling tournament in chapter 2, then conclude with some crazy twists in chapter 3 that we will not spoil. Right now, we are a couple matches into Chapter 2, so here's some quick pros on that. First, really cool how they included a player aid for this campaign mode, came in handy a lot of times. Okay, so then let's talk about the actual campaign where there's gonna be a lot of cool flavor text just injecting this narrative into the story. You'll feel the crowd supporting you or the enemy fighter, and then wrestlers will trash talk each other or promise to return with a wink, just a bunch of adrenaline-fueled wrestling madness. The flavor text will also lead into some decisions to become a good or a bad guy, where decisions there will actually influence your rival, which is a wrestler that is really tricky to beat. In fact, in this mode, you're incentivized to be very, very cautious about taking damage, because if you end a match with life critical or at 1, you can start suffering debilitating injuries, which will last over time. Yeah, these injuries get into the multiple ways that the solo campaign causes you to approach matches differently if you want to win. Starting injuries can reduce your hand size or reduce stamina, or campaign-specific directions can give your opponent a ton of momentum early, and these all let you problem solve in unique ways. Acquiring abilities is also madly satisfying to give you some answers to these difficulties. Like one I had a lot of fun with was me being a good guy, and then having this one-time ability to seize the initiative at any time and get 2 momentum. I won a lot of fights with using this as a pivotal point. The last pro is the clean integration of the Tama system, which is the same one used for normal solo fighting if you don't want to do the campaign. This is a really neat way to streamline the opponent's die rolls, where you just flip over cards from the top of the deck. This has a normal die roll result and then a kick out die result. This is actually pretty cool because that means that opponents can kick out on a result of 1, whereas normal humans, if you're playing the game normally, can only kick out on a result of 2 or lower because they're rolling 2 d6s. This Atama deck also gets modded really easily throughout the campaign to account for difficulty. Then for your dice roll, this is also treated well. You're also rolling an Atama dice every time. That is the way that the game adds uncertainty to your opponents blocking you. But then you get to roll an additional d6 to not skew your outcomes too much, as you now pick the highest one on a roll. Oh, and then some enemy fighters have some new robot passives to account for the 1v1 change, which is nice. We couldn't find any cons for the solo campaign so far. I mean, we ran into something called the ally mechanic that has yet to do something, but who knows down the line. So all we have here are just some nitpicks regarding solo play. First, while it is still tense with the unique dice rolling and then card drawing from your deck still, the counterplay does not feel anything like playing against a normal human. Not only do the robots have no stamina and potentially infinite reversals if they roll right, their attacks are just random that can feel especially unthematic in such a confrontational game. Sometimes it can be fitting with launching cool combos. Other times it can just feel like they're doing stupid desperation moves, like a super hard finisher right away. There is something to be said that when you're low health and definitely vulnerable to a pin, and then your robot opponent just seems content in punching you. Then again, we suppose this is here to help with the balance, especially because you do not want a lot of close matches because that incurs injuries that last over time and wreck you down the road. So I suppose that's rather thematic. So let's just go to the 2v2 right now. This is the next game mode, the 2v2 Double Trouble. Just like in Nacho Libre, you team up with a friend to take down another pair of wrestlers. The way this works is that only one person is attacking or defending at a time. And then to tag your teammate in, you need to do it after landing an attack of 2 or more damage. First team to pin down an opponent wins the game. Okay, so we only got to play this once out of the interest of time, but here's some quick pros on it. First, the tagging mechanic in this game is nuanced and allows for some really cool teamwork opportunities. Every player is engaged when fighting, whether they're in the ring or not, as you want to plan for comboing off your teammates' cards if they tag you in. Or you can sacrifice your own stamina to help your teammates' stamina in the ring. In general, you want to watch yours and your teammates' health, cards, stamina, then all your opponents. Who should you be pinning, and who on your team should not get pinned? Is it worth it to discard 3 cards from your hand to make your teammate escaping a pin easier, or does he just got it with the roll? Utilize your once per games to the best. Now your team has 4 in total and 2 reversals. The game also has these tag abilities that add even more nuance. See, when you tag in your teammate after doing 2 damage, you can choose to do one of these tag attacks. In triggering these, you're doing an attack that doesn't take a card from any player's hand. The problem with this though is that it expends both of your stamina. You really need to be frugal in using these. Included here is a hot tag that you can only do once and only when one of your teammates is 7 or less health, but in doing so allows for some really cool comebacks and getting damage on both enemies and 5 momentum. 5 momentum. That's a lot. The last pro for this 2v2 is that it is just a great idea to inject a lot of replayability and energy into this game with the same exact gameplay meeting theme, play one card at a time. There's lots of hype moments with teammates getting pinned, and the entire table gets hyped to see if that wrestler breaks free or not. Momentum feels even more nuanced with the capacity to tag in your teammate to keep attacking when you yourself are tired and running out of cards. Okay, well, time for some cons of Double Trouble. And the first one is that it needs to be way more clear on how to actually win. Now, of course, the rulebook says that you just follow standard 1v1 rules with some additional 2v2 rules on top. But man, at least one line that says that once a person in the ring is pinned down successfully, the game ends. That would be nice. The rulebook also needs to cement communication rules with talking to your teammates. But I have confirmed with the designers that this will be added in where you can talk to your teammate freely, but you just can never show each other what's in your hand. Then the player aids need to be standardized because one of the aids being the same color as the tag abilities is initially too confusing. Also, there needs to be 4 pairs of these for a 2v2 game, not just 2 in total. Come on. There's only one nitpick we could find for this. That is, these tagging abilities leave a little bit to be desired in terms of functioning component-wise. The game tells you to set them up initially in a deck, but no, because you want them spread out in front of you so you can trigger them at any time. Then the graphic design of these leaves a little bit to be desired compared to the normal attacks in this game, but hey, these are functional. Now it's time for a tentative score on all-time wrestling, where we try to critically evaluate the pros and cons of this version we've been sent here, as well as analyzing whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. So, this game, all-time wrestling, is gonna get a 9 out of 10. It is tentatively excellent. And you know what? That's the highest score we've ever given to an upcoming Kickstarter game. That is hype as heck. We've currently only been able to try a little more than half of the fighters, and we're impressed on balance and the crunchiness of this wrestling chaos, while it feels like how we would imagine pro wrestling to be like. It's quite a unique thing to say, I can hype up the crowd via arm drags, I can clothesline you, then sit on you with a power bomb to pin you to the ground and pray you don't break out. Cause I'm gonna be tired after all that. Or you could have blocked any of my attacks via losing some of your resources. This is all held together through well thought out dice rolling that maintains uncertainty, but it is reasonable to play around. While the rulebook has some growing pains, the game is fairly easy to learn when explained, especially if you choose to forego the advanced rules that we've been using to cover this game in its entirety. So if you omit the red boxes in the rulebook, you can play without combos or blocking, and just slowly learn the ropes of each fighter and the push and pull of all these sweaty wrestling stats and trackers. There is a lot to master here. In zooming out, we feel for wrestlers' jobs after playing this game. Yeah, there's so much to manage. There's your health, and then your stamina, and then there's literal hype to manage that goes up and down, and then you have some tricks up your sleeve with these special abilities, and there's even your wrestler-specific passives to worry about. What a job. And this is all done within 20 to 30 minutes by simply just playing one card at a time. For more wrestling intensity, there's also a cage match and a last man standing mode included that we didn't get to cover. These are just more game modes for 1v1 that even involve weapons for the last man standing. You can use ladders. All-time wrestling is just a very exceptional approach to a 1v1 wrestling showdown, with plenty of decision in every single card drop to not kill your opponent, but to pin them down. There's all these different characters that just cement the capacity to rematch your friends over and over and keep getting better. And there's even a 2v2. If you're into wrestling or fighting games and crunchy 1v1 combat is your thing, we highly suggest checking this out. If you're not so much into wrestling, well, maybe our personal scores here can help inform your decision.
My personal score for all-time wrestling is gonna be a 7 out of 10. A good time. First of all, I love the theme so much. Seeing all the art on the cards really sells the hilarious vibes of professional wrestlers beating the absolute crap out of each other. But then on top of that, the theme meets the gameplay super well. All the mechanics set the tone and pacing of a wrestling match almost perfectly. It really feels like your wrestlers get utterly brutalized as the match goes on, leaving you with less options while also being more vulnerable to getting pinned. Plus there's momentum as a mechanic just being hype as hell. It's super easy to imagine the crowd just going wild when one dude lands consecutive blows, and then eventually both the crowd and the wrestler become so fired up that some crazy special move comes out to seal the match. I absolutely love how much all-time wrestling encourages you to go in and push your advantages, but at the same time forces you to think about how to manage your resources as well as your opponents. You want to get your opponent to around half health while also getting your stamina low for the die roll bonus, which, by the way, I find hysterical that you get powered up from being tired. You're just like, I gotta go in, I gotta finish it. The back and forth between players as they try and bait out each other's defensive options feels amazingly tense, despite games taking half an hour or less. This is because the threat of landing a pin is always present even early on, and it really feels like both players become super vulnerable once they've broken through each other's reversals. Which also happens decently quickly because of how aggressively paced the game is. And then there's tons of replayability from all the different characters having different decks, abilities, and stats. I love it, I love it, I love it. Being able to sink a ton of games into just one character if you really want to learn them in and out means there's so much decision making that comes from picking out your starting cards to best deal with your opponent's unique abilities. But to me, at least, the game really shines at 4-player because once you introduce teamwork into the gameplay, the option possibilities, strategy, and interaction between players gets absolutely bonkers. It's really fun trying to balance out just how much ring time you and your teammate get and coordinating your taggings at the right time. I can easily imagine the wrestlers getting into bad situations, desperately reaching their hand out trying to tag their teammates in because it's definitely hard to switch around who's in the ring when someone gets tired and pin attacks start coming out. So yeah, I love the theme, a great gameplay, good levels of asymmetry, and healthy levels of randomness that can be adjusted from so many systems like momentum or discarding cards. Though I do have a few weird personal reasons as to why my personal score isn't higher. First, the strategies did feel sort of too samey for me at 2 players, where you do a few bits of damage before immediately going for momentum and pins, since pin attacks usually do enough damage to get opponents reasonably low in the first place. Like, maybe it's because of the way we're playing, but pins never have those professional wrestling moments where the countdown starts and there's a dramatic breakout. Instead, if a pin goes through because it wasn't blocked or reversed, that pin usually just wins the game. There's never really a reason to do pins early for those cool breakout moments, since they don't have a good chance of hitting and should pretty much only be used after getting some momentum. We have 4 players, good for me, because like I've said from previous personal scores, they don't really have a spot for 2-player games in our friend group, especially because, Yu-Gi-Oh is a thing. But then at 4-player, I super wish there were tokens or some sort of visual component to better represent who's currently in the ring. Because while the vibes are totally there at 2-player, something about how plain the tag team cards are in combination with a lack of actual board really tones down the spectacle aspect for me. I also wish the games were a little bit longer because this length isn't really my thing, since it sort of feels like it ends right when it's getting good because of the aggression. But it also feels like running out of cards and stamina is usually not happening unless you get really unlucky, especially due to finishers being unblockable. Though again, that's a personal thing, the game is very well designed to achieve its intended half an hour-ish playtime mark. Also, I really wish there was unique art for the characters that wasn't shared from the cards, because it really makes a big difference to me when the character art can speak more for itself instead of being cropped attack art that carefully cuts out other characters. But yeah, that's all I got. Great game, excellent mechanics, but if it were made tailored for me, it would be a bit longer with more cards, art, and a goofy little arena thing to put character tokens into for 4 players.
My personal score for all-time wrestling is going to be a 8 out of 10. I have a great time with it. And 8 out of 10. That's actually the highest score I've ever given to an upcoming Kickstarter game. So, yeah. Mad applause for this. All-time wrestling really went above and beyond from what I was used to in 1v1 duels, with a ridiculous amount of things to manage. That in being incredibly thematic and crunchy was madly satisfying to navigate. It is just so unique to play that when playing I feel like I'm fresh to the hobby again. After I initially floundered with how I should be attacking and handling card advantage with a 15-card deck, the decision space just really opened up for me. Like, the perpetual decision to block on attack by discarding 2 cards permanently is fun. Or how I could literally feel the momentum of the match swinging in my favor as I landed powerful hits and saw my opponent's health drop right before my eyes. Is now the right time for a pin down? Or should I just land one more attack and pass for now? This game just nails the player interaction and doing a good job of being a board game. There is great tension at looking at my opponent's, namely Daniel's, resources, and trying to get into their head whether they're going to block or use their reversal. Then the game is literally still playing one card at a time, then has dice rolling always feel tense due to the huge amounts of dice modifiers and the rippling effects that each successful attack can have on the game. I kid you not, no matter the game, when someone gets pinned down, things get real. And I tense up seeing those 2 dice jangle around to see if that wrestler breaks free. The game just nails uncertainty and thus comeback potential that I really like in high conflict, short games. It can be kinda tricky for me to play these 1v1 shorter games consistently because I have Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering that have deck building to fill that void. All-Time Wrestling doesn't have this deck building, but instead has really nuanced asymmetry to keep me invested, as well as having this super unique thematic fitting gameplay. Pinning down to win the game is so cool. The only real issue I have with this is me not really liking the art style, combined with how some of the art is exactly identical, which can sometimes lend to me ignoring most of the card art and only looking at the leftmost side of cards. Doesn't always happen, and even when it does, it's not a huge deal because the gameplay is so satisfying, and specials and finishers always catch my eye when played on the table. I predict that my personal score has a good chance to jump to a 9 out of 10 if I play more. The 2v2 mode felt a little overwhelming in my first and only play of it, and I imagine that it could become super smooth and be a short yet teamwork filled 2v2 game to consistently play, that fills a niche that our group didn't previously have an answer for. Then, as I play more fighters and get used to them, I would imagine that the scope of strategic possibilities continues to open up. I just want to show it to a bunch of my buddies because it fills this convenient time slot, lets me interact with my friends in person in a really cool wrestling way, and also just has very unique and admirable gameplay. Now I want to watch professional wrestling. As always, being sent this did not affect scoring, and we gotta give a shout out to our patrons. Thank you to our patrons. We got Manuel G, Brian C, Clifford H, Bora, Jeremy M, Charlie P, Quinton S, Alvin Y, Vomsky K, Matt G, Spinner71, Ryan J, Brad G, Tiamo, Mark A, James M, Evan B, Charles P Jr., Josh A, Basketball, Rado, Sophie, Cole Nellen, Hudson T, Pierce B, Omar F, MY, Ethan P, Bradley J, John C, Jorquez, SS Co, Alex L, Rob R, Swinton 2, Dave S, Josh R, Pat, Cyril C, Il Wayne, Kyle M, Amir H, Ryla Spin, Count S, Alba Boast, Sean P, Nicholas R, Andre, Kevin G, Alex G, Tim W, Jordan F, Ben A, Jeff B, Michael Z, Jeremy G, Vivian J, 10, and Gino G. Whew. We also got our Mad Lads of Cardboard. We got the Doctor, ZL, Jeff L, and Peter Z. And then we also got this guy right here. We also got our Mad Lady of Cardboard. We got Amy. Yeah, that was All-Time Wrestling. We should have all the Kickstarter stuff down below if you want to take a look. Yeah, we like this game. Yeah, go check it out. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what games you'd like to see us review, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.